I didn't know his name when I grabbed his hand, but somehow, everyone else did. The music was too loud, bass thumping through the floor like a second heartbeat, but I could still hear my own breath, sharp, uneven, too fast. As I spotted Tyler pushing through the restaurant doors, his eyes already locked on me like he knew exactly where I'd be. My fingers tightened around the tray I was holding, glasses clinking just enough to draw attention, and for a second I thought about running, just dropping everything and disappearing into the kitchen, out the back, anywhere but here. But my feet didn't move. They never did when it came to him. And that's when I saw him. The stranger, sitting alone at the corner table, dark suit, untouched drink, the kind of stillness that didn't belong in a place like this. I didn't think, I didn't plan, I just moved, weaving through tables, setting the tray down too fast, my hand reaching for his before I could stop myself. His skin was warm, steady, and it made my pulse stutter. "I need you to pretend you're my husband," I whispered, my voice barely holding together, "just for a minute." And for a second, nothing happened. He didn't react, didn't even look at me, and I thought I'd made the worst mistake of my life. Then his fingers shifted, not pulling away, just adjusting, like he was deciding something. And when he finally stood, the chair scraping softly against the floor, the air around us changed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but people noticed. Conversations dipped, waitstaff slowed, like some invisible signal had passed through the room. His hand slid to my waist, firm but not forceful, guiding me closer, and my breath caught because it felt real. Too real. Tyler's footsteps stopped a few feet away, and when I looked up at him, the anger on his face flickered, just for a second, replaced by something I hadn't seen before, hesitation. "There you are," the stranger said, his voice low, controlled, like he wasn't performing at all, like this was just another version of truth, and I nodded quickly, playing along. Even though my heart was slamming so hard it hurt, Tyler glanced between us, confusion tightening his jaw. "Emily, what is this?" he asked, but he wasn't looking at me anymore, his attention fixed on the man beside me. The stranger didn't answer right away, just held Tyler's gaze, and in that silence, something shifted again, deeper this time, heavier. I felt it in the way my shoulders straightened, in the way Tyler took a half step back without realizing it. Then someone at a nearby table whispered a name, quiet, almost swallowed by the music, but it spread, table to table, like a ripple. I didn't catch it at first. Didn't understand why the manager suddenly appeared near the entrance, why security stood straighter, why the bartender stopped mid-pour. But Tyler heard it, and whatever color he had left drained from his face. His voice dropped when he spoke again, careful now, uncertain. "I didn't realize," he started, but didn't finish. I turned my head slightly, just enough to look at the man whose hand still rested at my waist. And for the first time, he looked down at me, really looked, his eyes. Unreadable, steady in a way that made my thoughts scatter. "You asked for a husband," he said quietly, his thumb brushing once against my side like a punctuation mark. "So stand still." And I did, because suddenly leaving didn't feel like an option anymore, because suddenly this wasn't just about Tyler. And as the room held its breath around us, I realized I hadn't just asked for help. I had stepped into something I didn't understand, something that was already closing around me. Tyler swallowed whatever he had been about to say, his shoulders tightening as if he had just remembered something important, something dangerous. And for the first time since I had known him, he did not look at me like he owned the space I stood in. He looked at the man beside me like he was calculating distance, options, consequences. "I did not know she was with you," Tyler said carefully, each word slower than the last. And I felt the hand at my waist tighten just slightly, not enough to hurt, just enough to remind me it was there, grounding me in a reality that no longer felt like mine. "Now you do," the stranger replied, his voice even, almost calm, but there was something underneath it, something that made the air feel heavier, like a storm that had not decided whether to break. Tyler nodded once, quick, stiff, his eyes flicking back to me for half a second, searching for something I could not give him. Then he stepped back, then another step, and then he was gone, just like that, disappearing into the same door he had stormed through minutes ago. I did not move right away. I could not, because the silence he left behind felt louder than the music, louder than the clatter of plates and glasses. Slowly returning around us, and the stranger did not let go. "He will not come back," he said quietly, not asking, not guessing, just stating it like a fact already written somewhere I could not see. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, my body sagging for a second before I caught myself, before I remembered where I was, who I was standing with, and what I had just done. "Thank you," I said, the words coming out smaller than I intended, my voice still shaky. "I am sorry. I should not have." "No," he cut in softly. And that single word stopped everything, stopped my apology, stopped my thoughts, stopped the part of me that wanted to step away and pretend none of this had happened. His hand finally left my waist, but instead of relief, I felt the absence of it, like stepping out of a warm room into cold air. I took half a step back, putting space between us, enough to breathe again, but not enough to feel safe. "You needed a solution," he continued, his eyes still on me, steady, unreadable. "You chose one." And the way he said it made it sound less like a coincidence and more like a decision that carried weight I did not understand. I shook my head slightly, trying to ground myself, trying to remember that he was just a stranger, that I could walk away, that this was over. "It was just for a minute," I said quickly, almost defensively. I just needed him to leave. And for the first time, something almost like a smile touched his expression, faint, gone. As soon as it appeared. "Nothing is ever just a minute," he said, and the words settled somewhere deep, somewhere uncomfortable. Around us, the restaurant had resumed its rhythm, but it felt different now, like I was standing in a version of it that had shifted slightly out of place. The manager avoided looking directly at us as he passed. The other servers moved a little faster, a little quieter, and I realized they were not ignoring him. They were adjusting to him. "You should go back to work," I said, more to myself than to him, because normal was the only thing I could cling to right now, the only thing that made sense. I turned to reach for my tray, my fingers brushing the edge of the table, but before I could pick it up, his voice stopped me again. "Emily," he said, and my name in his mouth felt wrong, too familiar, too certain, and I froze, my breath catching as I slowly turned back to him. "How do you know my name?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it, my pulse picking up again, slower this time but heavier, like something inevitable. He did not answer right away, just watched me for a second that stretched too long, and in that silence, I felt it again, that shift, that sense that something had already moved beyond my control. "Because you chose me," he said finally, his voice lower now, quieter, but somehow stronger, and I felt the ground under me tilt in a way that had nothing to do with balance. I opened my mouth to respond, to argue, to say that it meant nothing, that it was random, that I had just been desperate, but the words did not come, because deep down, something told me he did not believe in random, and worse, part of me was starting to believe him. The words settled into me like a quiet warning, and for a second I forgot how to move, how to breathe, how to remember that I was supposed to be in control of my own life. "That does not mean anything," I said finally, but my voice lacked the certainty I wanted it to have. And he noticed, of course he noticed, because nothing about him suggested he missed anything. His gaze did not waver, not even when a server rushed past us or when a glass shattered somewhere near the bar, the normal chaos of the restaurant continuing like we were standing outside of it. "It means you trusted me more than anyone else in this room," he said, calm, precise, like he was explaining something simple, something obvious, and I shook my head again, faster this time. "I did not know you," I insisted, my fingers curling slightly at my sides as if I needed to hold on to something, anything. "Exactly," he replied, and that single word unraveled my argument before it could even take shape. I turned away from him then, forcing myself to move, to pick up the tray, to step back into the rhythm of work, because if I stayed standing there any longer, I felt like I would fall into whatever quiet gravity he carried with him. My hands were not steady as I lifted the glasses, but I focused on the familiar motions, the weight of the tray, the sound of ice shifting in the cups, grounding myself in something real. I could feel his presence behind me even as I walked away, not touching, not following, but there, like something that did not need to chase because it already knew where I would be. The next 10 minutes blurred into routine, orders taken, drinks delivered, polite smiles I did not feel, but every time I passed the corner table, I felt it again, that pull, that awareness, like my body recognized him before my mind could argue against it. He did not call me back, did not stop me, and somehow that made it worse, because it felt like he did not have to. When I finally gathered the courage to look, really look, he was still there, exactly where I had left him, one hand resting on the table, the other loosely holding his glass, untouched, his eyes lifting to meet mine like he had been waiting for that exact moment. My steps slowed without permission, my tray suddenly feeling heavier than it should have, and before I could convince myself to keep walking, I found myself turning toward him again. "You should leave," I said quietly when I reached the table, the words coming out softer than I intended, almost like a suggestion instead of a demand. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened, just slightly. "Why?" he asked, and the question was simple, but it carried weight, like there was more behind it than I could see. I hesitated, glancing around, noticing again the way people avoided looking too closely, the way the manager kept a careful distance, the way the room seemed to orbit around him without ever touching. "Because this is just a restaurant," I said, choosing my words carefully. "And I just work here." And for a moment, silence stretched between us again, not uncomfortable, not exactly, just full. Then he set the glass down with a soft, deliberate sound, the kind that made you notice even if you did not want to. "No," he said quietly, standing up in one smooth motion that felt controlled, intentional. "This is the place where you asked me to stay." And the way he said it made it feel less like a memory and more like a promise. I took a small step back without thinking, my heartbeat picking up again, slower than before but deeper, heavier, like it knew something I did not. "I did not ask you to stay," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I could hear the weakness in them. He stepped closer, not invading, not overwhelming, just enough to close the distance I had tried to create. "You asked me to be something," he said, his voice low, steady. "And I do not take roles I cannot finish." And that was the moment it shifted again, the moment it stopped feeling like a strange coincidence and started feeling like something else entirely, something that was already moving forward whether I agreed with it or not. And as I stood there, caught between stepping back and standing still, I realized I had not just involved him in my problem. I had stepped into his world, and there was no clear way out. "Then finish it somewhere else," I said, and this time my voice held, not strong, not confident, but steady enough to feel like it belonged to me again. For a brief second, something shifted in his expression, not irritation, not surprise, just a quiet acknowledgement, like he had expected resistance and was measuring it. The space between us felt smaller now, not because he had moved closer, but because I could not ignore him anymore, not after everything that had just happened. I tightened my grip on the tray, grounding myself in the weight, in the routine, in the version of my life that still made sense. "I have a job," I continued, glancing around at the tables filling back up with conversation, at the familiar faces that suddenly felt distant. "And this is not whatever you think it is." And for a moment, I thought he might argue, might push, might step further into whatever line I was trying to draw. Instead, he reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, the motion controlled enough that it drew attention without causing alarm, and placed something on the table in front of me. A card, thick, matte, with nothing but a name and a number. Simple, almost understated, but somehow heavier than it should have been. "When your shift ends," he said, his tone quieter now, almost conversational, "you will need a ride home." And I frowned immediately, the words hitting wrong, too certain, too assuming. "I can get home on my own," I replied quickly, a reflex more than anything, because independence was the one thing I refused to lose. His eyes held mine, not challenging, not dismissing, just waiting, like he knew something I did not. "You can," he agreed after a beat, "but you should not." And the difference between those two words settled uneasily in my chest. I opened my mouth to argue again, to insist, to push back, but the memory of Tyler's face, the way it had changed, the way he had stepped back without protest, flickered through my mind, and for the first time, doubt slipped in where certainty used to be. I looked down at the card, then back at him, trying to understand what he was really offering, what he expected in return, because nothing about this felt simple anymore. "I do not know you," I said again, softer this time, not as a defense, but as a reminder, mostly to myself. He nodded once, like that fact did not change anything. You will, he replied, and the calm certainty in his voice made my pulse pick up again, slower now, deeper, like something settling in place. A moment passed, then another, and then he stepped back, finally creating distance, real distance this time, the kind that let me breathe without feeling watched. Finish your shift, Emily, he said, turning slightly as if the conversation had already ended, and decide if you prefer coincidence or intention. And with that, he walked away, not hurried, not dramatic, just gone, like he had never needed to stay in the first place. I stood there for a second too long, staring at the empty space he left behind, the card still resting on the table, quiet and impossible to ignore. Around me, everything resumed, orders called out, laughter rising, glasses clinking, but it all sounded different now, like I was hearing it through something thicker, something slower. I picked up the card with fingers that were not as steady as I wanted them to be, turning it over once, twice, as if it might explain itself, as if it might tell me why this felt less like a choice and more like the beginning of something I had already stepped into. And as I slipped it into my apron, telling myself it meant nothing, that I would throw it away later, that this was just another strange moment in a long day, I knew I was lying, because part of me had already decided I was not done with him, and that realization felt more dangerous than anything Tyler had ever done. The rest of my shift passed in fragments, like pieces of a night that refused to settle into something normal. And no matter how many orders I took or how many times I forced a smile, I could still feel the card in my apron pocket, light but impossible to ignore, like it had weight that only I could feel. Every time my hand brushed against it, my thoughts drifted back to him, to the way he spoke, to the way the entire room had shifted without a single raised voice, and I hated that part of me. Was curious, hated that part of me was not afraid in the way I should have been. By the time the clock above the bar hit 11:45, my feet ached and my patience was thin, and all I wanted was to go home, take a hot shower, and forget that tonight had ever happened. I clocked out, grabbed my jacket, and stepped outside into the cool night air, the city quieter now, the hum of traffic lower, steadier, like the world had finally exhaled. For a moment, I just stood there on the sidewalk, letting the cold settle into my skin, trying to decide which direction to walk, trying to convince myself that I had already made the decision to ignore him, that the card meant nothing, that I would toss it into the nearest trash can and move on. But my hand did not move toward the trash, it moved toward my pocket, pulling the card out before I could stop myself. The name stared back at me, simple, clean, and the number beneath it felt like a line I should not cross. I stared at it longer than I should have, my thumb tracing the edge once before I exhaled slowly and slipped it back into my pocket. It means nothing, I whispered under my breath, like saying it out loud might make it true, and then I started walking. The streetlights stretched ahead in a quiet line, casting soft pools of light on the pavement, and for the first few blocks, everything felt normal again, almost peaceful, like I had managed to leave whatever that was behind me. But then I heard it, not loud, not obvious, just the faint sound of footsteps behind me that matched my pace a little too closely. I told myself it was nothing, just another person heading home, just the city being the city, but my shoulders tightened anyway, my steps quickening just slightly. The sound followed, steady, not rushing, not closing in, just there. I turned the corner onto a quieter street, one I usually avoided this late, but tonight it felt like the fastest way home. And that was when the unease settled in deeper, heavier, like something pressing against my chest. I stopped walking abruptly, turning halfway, my heart beating faster now, searching the dim light for whoever had been behind me. But the sidewalk was empty, the shadows stretching long and still, like nothing had ever been there. For a second, I almost laughed, the tension slipping just enough to feel ridiculous, like I had imagined the whole thing, like my mind was just catching up to the stress of the night. You are overthinking, I muttered, shaking my head as I turned back around, ready to keep moving, ready to forget this too. And then I saw it, parked at the curb just ahead, a black car I did not recognize, engine running, headlights off, blending into the night like it belonged there. I slowed Without meaning to, my breath catching slightly as I took another step forward. Then another, my instincts pulling in two directions at once. One telling me to keep walking, to ignore it, the other telling me to stop, to turn back, to listen to the part of me that knew tonight had already gone too far to be normal. The passenger door opened before I could decide, smooth, quiet, like it had been waiting for me, and I froze. Every thought in my head colliding at once, because deep down, I already knew exactly who was inside. I did not move, not right away, because stepping forward felt like agreeing to something I had not said yes to, and stepping back felt like admitting I was afraid, and I refused to give either of those things power over me. The open car door waited, silent, patient, like it already knew what I would do, and the city around me seemed to fade just slightly. The distant traffic, the hum of streetlights, all of it slipping into the background as my focus narrowed on that single moment. You planned this, I said, my voice quieter than I expected, but steady enough to hold. And from inside the car, his voice answered, calm, familiar. I anticipated it. And somehow that was worse. I took a slow breath, the cool night air filling my lungs as I stepped closer, not because I had decided to trust him, but because standing still felt like losing control entirely. I leaned slightly, just enough to see inside, and there he was, exactly as composed as before, sitting in the back seat like this was just another part of his day, like waiting for me was something he had already accounted for. You followed me, I said, not a question this time, because the answer was already clear. His gaze lifted to meet mine, steady, unshaken. No, he replied. I made sure you were not alone, and the difference between those two things settled uneasily in my chest. Not comforting, not threatening, just inevitable. I hesitated, my hand brushing against the edge of the open door, feeling the smooth metal under my fingers, grounding myself in something real again. I did not ask for this, I said, and this time, there was no defensiveness in my voice, just truth. He nodded. Once, like he accepted that, like it changed nothing. You asked for something else, he said. This is what came with it. And I exhaled slowly, my thoughts tangling around his words, trying to find a way out of them. A ride home does not come with conditions, I replied, a little sharper now, holding on to the last pieces of control I could find. His expression shifted just slightly, not offended, not challenged, just attentive. It does when someone else is still thinking about you, he said quietly. And that was the moment the unease returned, stronger this time, sharper, because I knew exactly who he meant. I glanced back down the street instinctively, half expecting to see Tyler again, but the sidewalk remained empty, still, like it had before. You do not know that, I said, but the words felt weaker now, less certain. I do, he replied, simple, direct, like there was no room for doubt. And something in the way he said it made my pulse pick up again, not fast, not panicked, just heavy, like it was adjusting to a truth I had not accepted yet. Silence stretched between us, filled with things neither of us said, and for a second, I imagined what would happen if I walked away, if I turned back toward the brighter streets, the familiar noise, the version of my life that did not include him. But then I looked at the open door again, at the quiet certainty of it, at the way this moment felt like a line I had already crossed without realizing. This does not mean anything, I said, more to myself than to him, as I finally stepped forward, lowering myself into the seat, the door closing behind me with a soft, final sound that felt louder than it should have. The interior was warm, quiet, insulated from the outside world in a way that made everything feel distant, like I had stepped into a different version of the night. I sat still for a second, my hands resting in my lap, my thoughts catching up to the decision I had just made. Just a ride, I added, turning slightly toward him, needing to say it out loud, needing to define the boundary before it disappeared completely. His gaze held mine for a moment, unreadable. Then he nodded once, slow, deliberate. For now, he said, and something in those two words told me that whatever this was, it was not ending when the car stopped. The car moved before I realized it, smooth and quiet, the kind of motion you only notice when everything else is still, and I sat there watching the city slide past the window, familiar streets suddenly looking different, like I was seeing them from a distance instead of being part of them. No music played, No conversation filled the space. Just the low hum of the engine and the soft rhythm of my own breathing as I tried to make sense of what I had just stepped into. "Where are we going?" I asked after a moment, my voice steady but cautious, because I needed something concrete, something defined. "Home," he replied, like it was the simplest answer in the world, and I hesitated, my fingers tightening slightly in my lap. "You do not know where I live," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, the certainty behind them felt weaker than it should have. He glanced at me briefly, not long enough to feel intrusive, just enough to acknowledge the question. "You will tell me," he said, and the calm assumption in his tone made something in me resist immediately. "Or I will get out," I countered, turning slightly toward him, holding onto that one piece of control I still had. For a second, the silence stretched again, thicker this time, like it was weighing the space between us, and then he nodded once, slow, deliberate. "Then tell me," he said, and I realized he had just given me the choice back, not by force, not by pressure, but by making it clear that the decision was mine to make. I let out a small breath, tension easing just enough to think clearly again, and I gave him the address, watching his expression for any sign of reaction, any hint that he already knew it, but his face remained composed, unreadable. The car adjusted its route almost immediately, turning onto a quieter street, and for a moment, everything felt almost normal again, like this was just a ride, just a stranger doing a favor, just a night that would end like any other. But the feeling did not last, because the silence between us was not empty. It was full, filled with unspoken things, with questions I was not sure I wanted answers to. "Why me?" I asked suddenly, the question slipping out before I could stop it, because it had been sitting there, waiting, growing heavier with every mile. He did not answer right away, and I almost regretted asking, almost told myself to let it go. But then he spoke, his voice quieter now, more thoughtful. "Because you asked," he said, and I shook my head immediately, frustration flickering through me. "That is not an answer," I replied, turning to face him more fully now, needing something real, something that made sense. His gaze met mine, steady, unwavering, and for a moment, I felt like he was deciding how much to say, how much to reveal. "Most people look for the safest option," he said slowly. "You did not." And the words settled in a way I did not expect, not flattering, not comforting, just accurate. I looked away then, back out the window, my reflection faint in the glass, my expression more uncertain than I wanted it to be. "I was desperate," I said quietly, correcting him, correcting the version of me he seemed to see. "No," he replied just as quietly. "You were decisive." And something about that distinction stayed with me, echoing in a way I could not ignore. The car slowed as we turned onto my street, the familiar row of buildings coming into view, the worn sidewalks, the flickering streetlight near the corner, everything exactly as it had always been, and yet it felt different now, like I had changed something simply by leaving and coming back. The car came to a stop in front of my building, the engine idling softly, and for a second, neither of us moved. "This is it," I said, more to break the silence than anything else, reaching for the door handle but not opening it yet. "Yes," he replied, and I could feel his gaze on me again, not heavy, not demanding, just present. I hesitated, my hand resting on the door, my thoughts circling around everything that had happened, everything that had not been said. "Thank you," I said finally, the words simple, but real, because despite everything, he had done exactly what he said he would do. He nodded once, acknowledging it, but his expression did not soften, did not change. "You are welcome," he said, and then, after a brief pause, he added, "But this is not over," and the quiet certainty in his voice made my chest tighten slightly, because I knew he was not making a suggestion, he was stating something that had already been decided. And as I stepped out of the car into the cool night air, closing the door behind me, I realized that walking away did not feel like leaving anymore. It felt like the beginning of something I could not see yet. I did not look back right away, because I knew if I did, I would see him still there, still watching, and something about that felt too final, too certain, like acknowledging it would make everything real in a way I was not ready for. The night air felt colder than before as I stepped onto the sidewalk, My apartment building rising in front of me like it always had, familiar, ordinary, safe. And I held on to that feeling as tightly as I could. I walked up the steps, my keys already in my hand. The small metallic sound grounding me, reminding me that this was my life, my space, not his. But even as I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I could feel it, that shift, like something had followed me in without making a sound. The hallway lights flickered once as I moved past them, casting brief shadows against the walls, and I told myself it was just the building, just the old wiring, just another normal thing I had stopped noticing. My footsteps echoed softly as I climbed the stairs, each step slower than the last, because the quiet felt different tonight, heavier, like it was listening. By the time I reached my door, my pulse had picked up again, not fast, not panicked, just aware, like my instincts were trying to tell me something I could not quite hear. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, immediately locking it behind me, the click louder than usual, more final, and for a second I just stood there, leaning back against it, letting the silence settle around me. My apartment was exactly as I had left it, the small kitchen to the left, the couch with the throw blanket draped over one side, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the space, everything ordinary, everything unchanged, and yet it did not feel the same. I moved slowly, setting my bag down on the counter, shrugging off my jacket, my mind still replaying the night in fragments, his voice, his words, the way he had said it was not over like it was already decided. "It is over," I muttered under my breath, pushing the thought away as I walked toward the window. Pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out at the street below, the car was still there. My breath caught slightly as I watched it, the dark shape blending into the night. Engine quiet now, lights off, like it was just another parked car, like it had always been there. I told myself it meant nothing, that he was just making sure I got inside safely, that he would leave any second now, that this was the end of it. But the seconds stretched, then minutes, and the car did not move. I let the curtain fall back into place, my chest tightening slightly, not from fear, not exactly, but from the realization that whatever this was, it was not going to disappear just because I wanted it to. I turned away from the window, pacing once across the small space, my thoughts circling, searching for something solid to hold on to, something that made sense. I pulled the card from my pocket again without thinking, staring at it like it might explain everything, like it might give me a reason to either call or throw it away. My thumb traced the edge once more, slower this time, more deliberate. And I felt that same pull again, that same quiet gravity that had started the moment I touched his hand. "This does not mean anything," I said again. But the words felt weaker now, like they were losing their hold. My phone sat on the counter, dark, silent, waiting, and for a long moment, I just looked at it, the distance between us suddenly feeling much larger than a few feet. I could walk away, go to bed, wake up tomorrow, pretend none of this had happened, pretend he was just a stranger who helped me once and disappeared. Or I could pick it up, dial the number, and step further into something I did not understand. I exhaled slowly, my hand hovering over the phone, my mind caught between instinct and reason, between safety and something else I could not name. And as the silence stretched around me, heavy and expectant, I realized the real danger was not him waiting outside. It was the part of me that was already considering opening the door again. I stood there longer than I should have, my hand hovering over the phone like it was something fragile, something that could break if I touched it the wrong way. And maybe it could. Maybe everything about tonight had already shifted too far to go back. The silence in my apartment pressed in around me, thick, expectant, like it was waiting for a decision I had not fully made yet. And I realized I was not just choosing whether to call him. I was choosing whether to pretend this never happened or admit that it already had. My fingers curled slowly, then steadied, and before I could overthink it again, I picked up the phone. The screen lit up, too bright for the dim room, reflecting back at me like a question I could not ignore. I stared at it for a second, then another, my thumb moving almost on its own as I keyed in the number from memory, because I had memorized it without realizing. Because some part of me had already decided long before this moment. The line rang once, twice, and then it connected. "Emily." His voice came through immediately, low, certain, like he had been expecting the call, like he had known exactly when it would come, and my breath caught just slightly at the sound of it. at the way it settled into the quiet space around me. "You are still outside," I said, not a question, my voice softer now, steadier in a different way, because something about this felt inevitable. "Yes," he replied. Simple, direct, no hesitation, and I closed my eyes for a brief second, letting that sink in. "Why?" I asked, because I needed to hear him say it. Needed to understand the part of this that logic could not explain. There was a pause, not long, just enough to feel intentional, like he was choosing his words carefully. "Because you have not decided yet," he said, and the truth in that statement hit harder than I expected, because he was right, because standing here with the phone in my hand meant I had already moved past denial. I exhaled slowly, opening my eyes again, my gaze drifting toward the window without meaning to, toward the street where I knew he was still waiting. "And if I decide not to?" I asked quietly, testing the boundary, testing him. Another pause, slightly longer this time, but not uncertain. "Then I leave," he said, calm, absolute, like it was that simple, like he would walk away without question, without hesitation. I let that settle, turning it over in my mind, feeling the weight of it, because part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that I still had full control over how this ended. But another part of me, quieter, more honest, knew that control had already shifted the moment I reached for his hand. I walked slowly toward the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see the car again. Still there, still waiting, unchanged, and something about that steadiness pulled at me in a way I could not ignore. "You said this is not over," I murmured into the phone, my voice barely above a whisper now, because saying it out loud made it real in a way I could not take back. "It is not," he replied, just as quietly, and there was no pressure in it, no demand, just certainty. I swallowed, my hand tightening slightly around the phone as I stood there, suspended between staying inside and stepping back out into the night. "Then what is it?" I asked, finally voicing the question that had been building since the beginning. The answer did not come right away, and for a second, I thought he might not answer at all, that he might leave it undefined, something I would have to figure out on my own. But then he spoke, his voice lower now, more deliberate. "It is the moment after a choice," he said. "The part where you learn what it changes." And the words settled into me slowly, deeper than I expected, because they did not feel like a warning. They felt like a truth I had already stepped into. I looked at the door then, the distance between me and it suddenly feeling smaller, easier to cross, like the decision had already been made somewhere beneath the surface. "Stay there," I said quietly, not thinking, just speaking, and the second the words left my mouth, I knew everything had shifted again. There was no hesitation on the other end, no surprise. "I am not going anywhere," he replied, and something about that made my chest tighten, not with fear, not exactly, but with the realization that this was no longer about coincidence or desperation. I ended the call slowly, my hand lingering on the phone for a second before lowering it, and then I moved, crossing the room, reaching for the door, my fingers brushing the handle as my pulse steadied into something new, something certain, because this time, when I opened it, I was not running from anything. I was stepping towards something I chose.